Hello and welcome to the Intersection Science Fellow Symposium 2023. Closed captioning is available by choosing live transcript at the bottom of your screen. Please send a chat to the host if you are having any technical issues. Please submit any questions you have for the speakers in the Q&A panel located on the right of your screen. Thank you.
All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the start of ISFS Day 2. We'll be starting the day with a panel entitled The Reality of Being a PI. My name is Ariana Gomez, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Washington. And I have the pleasure of co-moderating the session alongside Dr. Chi-Wen Dong, who is a postdoc at Tufts University. Throughout our scientific training, we work alongside principal investigators, but we may not always be aware of what their day-to-day responsibilities look like. So today we're joined by 3 PIs who've been running their lab for many years and additionally contribute to diversity efforts, outreach, and program management. I will be asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves in a minute, but first I'd like to ask the audience to type any of your questions into the Q&A box as we go. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible within the next hour. And so now I'd like to ask our panelists to spend a couple of minutes just introducing themselves. I'll call on each of you, and when I do, can you please tell us your name, pronouns, affiliations, and share one quick piece of advice you would give to a new PI. Let's start with Dr. Shen.
So my name is Amy Shen, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate professor at Tufts University School of Medicine, and there's a advice for when you start. I don't know. There's like so many things that I would probably just in terms of organization, like having well-organized protocols and a lab manual for sort of setting expectations might be one of the things that I would suggest to start with.
Great, thank you, Dr. Shen. Dr. Robinson, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. First, thank you for the opportunity to come and present. So I'm Doug Robinson. I'm at the Department of Cell Biology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where I've been now for 22 years, hard to believe. And in terms of advice for being a PI, I would say I agree with everything that Dr. Shen just stated, but I would also add that I think for me, it was crucial to set a vision and a goal, like a big goal. And then to break that goal down into steps that could be achieved on various timescales, like, for example, how long a grant cycle might be. And then I think the other thing that I found very important is to what I call diversifying my portfolio, meaning don't just work on one thing, work on different things, especially things that can give you positive return on a more immediate time frame. Because sometimes in science, it can take a long time before you really feel the impact of what you've done. So things like training your students is one form of immediate benefit and gratitude that you can get from the process of being a PI. Thank you.
Great, Dr. Kwan.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ron Kwan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Orthopedics at the University of Washington. I'm also a member of the Institute for Stem Cell and Regenerative Medicine. I use he, him pronouns. Yeah, first I just want to say thank you to the organizing committee for organizing this wonderful conference, as well as congratulations to the fellows. And yeah, I was actually thinking about when I was a new PI and just pieces of advice that I take with me. And I actually couldn't think of anything, but we actually had a new PI come into our institute recently, and one of the things that they were interested in was like different resources that I found helpful, and that's going to be very institution specific. But one thing that I did find very helpful when I was a new PI, it's a book called the Grant Application Writers Workbook, NIH edition. And this was pointed out to me by my PhD PI, Chris Jacobs. And it's a fantastic book that sort of helps to demystify the grant writing process. It almost makes it formulaic. There's like worksheets where you kind of outline your ideas, and it helps you then construct them into a really cogent narrative and a compelling narrative for grants. And I just found it extremely helpful. I continue to use it throughout still to this day. So That's just one practical piece of advice.
Could I follow up on that really? Because that was really great advice that I also got from another starting PI. Was like writing winning grant proposals, and it is a little bit formulaic, but like I didn't really have a lot of experience writing grants in advance, and that as well as having example grants from fellow PIs that were successful at applying for grants, and leaning on faculty mentors who read my grant proposals was extremely helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your pieces of advice. And so now we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. So if anyone in the audience has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section and we'll go ahead and get to them. But first, so we did collect some questions from the fellows previously. And so someone was wondering, being a PI involves many skills, including time management. So could you all please talk about balancing family, work, and hobbies? And what are some of the practical things that have worked for you for balancing different aspects of your life? I'm going to ask Dr. Robinson to go, chime in first.
Okay. Oh, and I realized I forgot to tell you my pronouns. It's he and him, he or him. Yeah, so how do I balance time and so forth? So what was really critical for me was to sort of figure out when my sweet spots in the day were for creative, deep thinking versus when other times of the day when I'm not so good at that. And so what I would do is I would start to say, okay, because we have a 24-hour cycle and you have a certain circadian rhythm for your sleep and so forth. And there are sweet spots like, I'm very focused in the morning, frankly, starting at 4:30 or 5 a.m. But I can still get some things done later in the day, later in the evening if need be. So I would find that those, things that are easy to do, that don't require much thought, but have to be done, I'll do in the time when I don't need to have that deep focus. And then things like writing grants, papers, reading literature, I'll do in the time of the day when I'm kind of hit my my cognitive prime, kind of think of it that way. And then that then allows me to feel better throughout the day. When I've got the hard, the important stuff really taken care of in a way that I can be very satisfied with. And then, going off and doing things with your family and having fun is actually absolutely critical for being able to have that space when you need to think deeply. So balancing it all out and making sure you have time for fun, building into your 7-day a week, 24-hour clock is really important and essential.
Great. Dr. Shen, do you have anything to add?
I actually took a time management workshop from another faculty member. It was for our graduate students, but I learned some really useful things from that, just in terms of like planning out your week and blocking off time, similar to what Dr. Robinson was saying about figuring out when your best times are for doing different tasks. I think in thinking back to when I was starting my lab, I was at the bench a lot. Like one of the best pieces of advice I got from my postdoc mentor was that I was going to be my best postdoc, and everybody has a different situation. I didn't really have many people in my lab to start, and everybody was very junior. And so I was in lab like a ton. And so actually when I was first starting, it was very hard to figure out how to balance being in lab and then a bunch of the newer commitments that I wasn't used to when I was a postdoc, and like, sitting in faculty meeting or just like various things that would be on my schedule that I just wasn't used to like working around. And so if I'd had more of a plan, like I have these things that are coming up, like, and thinking more in advance and like what I can plan around different things, as well as scheduling in protected time. So that was very similar to what Dr. Robinson was saying about thinking about when your best times are. And so, you get these like calendar invites and you're like, well, I don't have anything on my schedule from these times to these times, but like you can control, or you should control when you make yourself available for certain things. And so I've heard from different PIs that, they'll be like, they'll just schedule time with themselves, like on their calendar, if like they share their calendar with people in the lab, like that's their time that they write, or, those types of things. And then the other thing is to really prioritize what are the things that are important for you to be able to function at your best. Like, I definitely think that it's important to, I know for myself that being able to exercise is like critical for mental health, and just like, I will sleep a little less just so I can like exercise. And everybody has the different thing that kind of helps center themselves or gives them space, just kind of like be able to sustain something, pretty demanding at the beginning. Like I definitely don't want to start my lab again. It was incredibly stressful, very rewarding, but like, I don't know, I personally was very, I don't know, like terrified and excited and overwhelmed. And so just like having the thing that, was really the thing that gave me time to just be on my own and re-energize is really important.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Kwan?
Yeah, so many things that Drs. Shen and Robinson resonate with me. Dr. Shen was talking about exercise, and so, one of the things actually when I became a new PI, I came in with this, you come in with this, this sort of broad idea that okay, it's there's going to be these huge demands on your time. It's going to be hard to balance, your work and personal lives. But when I would take a look around me, and even when I was training, I felt like my PhD PI and my postdoctoral PI they actually had great work-life balances. And when I would look in the environment around me, a lot of the people that I would consider to be extremely successful, I would look at the things that they were doing and what it seemed like they had great work-life balances too. And it seemed like actually having a good balance was key maybe to their success. And actually a lot of them were, they made exercise a regular part of their sort of day-to-day lives. So I guess, one of the things that I feel like I like to try to do for my own, because I think there's also like sometimes a guilt that you're, when you are taking personal time, somehow there's this idea that's been ingrained in us, like, oh, you're not putting your fullest effort, right? But I feel like it's important to actually kind of destigmatize that. And so one of the things that I like to kind of make the analogy of is like, so I like to run for my exercise. And, if you look at sort of how professional runners train, it turns out that the best way to achieve fitness is not to actually run as hard as you can every single day. Eventually your fitness actually plateaus, and then you overtrain and you get injured. And so the way that professional athletes actually train is they periodize their training. So in other words, within a week, they'll have 2 hard days where they'll run really hard. And then the other days they'll run easy. They'll have built-in rest days. And then within a month, they'll say, okay, 2 weeks are going to be hard training, and then 1 week is going to be easy. And then within a season, they actually say, okay, I'm actually going to rest for 3 months, And actually in our work lives, we actually periodize naturally, right? We take weekends off. And even, Dr. Robinson was saying how just in the day, there are these like, it's important to periodize sort of when you are more productive and less productive. And so I really think that actually these times of rest are critical for maintaining our productivity. And eventually what happens with athletes is by doing these rest cycles, you actually sort of have these increasing waves of increasing fitness, and you can actually break through that plateau. So I actually think the same could apply to our work lives, and that rest is actually important to getting the most productivity out of us in the long term. So that's how I like to approach it.
And if I can add one thing, so I like to run, but I also like to cycle. And there's a great trail that is up through, has a nice, beautiful canopy. It runs by a river that I like to do a lot of my cycling on. And it's amazing how you go out there for a 30-mile, 25-mile ride or whatever, and enjoying the nature and hearing the water run in the river. And suddenly an idea will come to you that can impact your research. And it's like, so sometimes having that time to just sort of relax and let go, ironically, can actually spark some creativity in what you're thinking about. So it's maybe a side benefit of building in those kinds of moments.
It's a great point. If I could add on in a slightly different vein, I sort of think of like when I was starting my lab and then when I had a family. And in many ways, that built-in rest period now is like my days are very different before having a family and having kids. And it is tiring like a lot of the times, but in many ways, just like having that built-in break is really nice, and it provides like useful perspective about not stressing out about too many things. and just, enjoying the moment, and being, like kids or whatever it is, that just like when you are doing something, like let yourself be in that moment instead of feeling like you're, feeling guilty about what you're doing. Just kind of like embrace the time that you are committing to, whatever it is, like that. If you're like not working, like thinking of the not working part as really important to your overall health, and in many ways can be helpful for your productivity. So it's like dual benefits. I mean, it is hard to balance, work and life, but I do think that you get some really useful perspective from being outside of your work environment, whether it's, being on a club volleyball team or whatever, like, or being out in nature. It's just being like doing something different is, I think, really critical.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for those answers. We actually have a good amount of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to jump to those now. So Emily is wondering, oh my gosh, what just happened? Okay, well, I should not have done that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so Emily is wondering, thank you all for your time. So when starting your lab, when did you start recruiting members? Right away after taking time to settle in for the semester, a quarter, et cetera? And are there any recommendations for those experiences? Dr. Shen, can you start us off?
So I think it really depends on what type of institution you're at. I was starting at the University of Vermont, and it was very difficult to get postdocs, and if like honestly, like I wouldn't have wanted a postdoc for me either. And so I started off recruiting technicians, and well, I was planning to recruit a technician who wanted to go to graduate school. It was like somebody who I could kind of work with side by side of the bench, and then it just so happened that there was a more senior technician who had a lot of experience and would be sort of like a more lab manager type role that I wasn't anticipating hiring, but it was very useful to have somebody who kind of provided the stability. And so for my first starting, like the place that I was at, it was harder to get postdocs, and then graduate students there was relatively few number for the number of faculty that we had, and so I was trying to recruit graduate students, but who I could hire immediately were technicians, and it was wonderful. And then I also had a number of undergraduates, and so I think it just really depends on where you're at. And then also some people don't want to be at the bench, and so obviously that just thinking about what your skill set is, that and sort of playing to your strengths, and thinking really a lot about what are the things that you're good at doing, and then what are things you need to you'd like to work on, and sort of playing to your strengths so you can have be able to build up the other things you'd like to work on later.
Awesome. Dr. Kwan, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking about so sort of the different events that happened during our initial hire. So when I was starting up, my particular and maybe this is a point for a different future part in the panel, as far as startups and things like that. But my particular startup was, I'd say, not very good, in the sense that the way that it was structured was that there was a certain amount of startup funds I had access to that was fairly, I'd say, modest, but the rest of it was contingent on me getting other funding, which would then be matched by my institution. So I had to be really, really sort of judicious about how I use my initial funds. And what it came down to was, do I want to sort of invest in a person to help initially, or a really critical piece of equipment that I knew I needed for my research? And so that was a really hard decision. Ultimately, what I decided was that oftentimes with grants, it's much easier to support personnel through grants than it is to buy major pieces of equipment. In fact, oftentimes it's not even allowed. And so I made the decision to actually invest in the equipment, and with the expectation that I'd be able to support personnel through sort of the initial grants that I would be able to get, in the future. And so that's the decision that I made. And so yeah, and so initially it was sort of, amongst all the different things that I was balancing as a new PI, I was definitely at the bench a lot. I had an amazing team of sort of undergraduate students, medical students, residents, rotation students that would help to generate preliminary data, and that's how we initially started.
Great, thank you for that perspective, Dr. Robinson.
Yes, I was thinking of Dr. Shen's point in one of her earlier comments that at the beginning, you are your own best postdoc. And that was actually very much the same advice I had gotten when I started. You bring the experience at the beginning. And so I never quite understand how labs can operate where they're not at the bench at the beginning. The PIs are not at the bench because they are the ones that are the experts at that point. The other thing is I was getting ready to give a presentation at some institutional event that was about lab management. And there was a panel discussion ahead of that where they were having a debate, which is more important to get grad students or get postdocs or get technicians when you're starting, blah, blah, blah. And for me, my takeaway on that is what's important is it's who you get, and you're going to work with who you get. You may or may not be able to get a postdoc right away. You may or may not get a grad student right away. You have a little more control over a technician, right? Because you can post a position and hopefully then recruit at any time in the year. That's not then coupled to rotation processes, or if you recruit a postdoc, it might take a year before they show up, but you've got to hit the ground running at day one. You can't wait 12 months or 2 years to really get things off the ground and moving forward. So for me, fortunately, I did recruit 3 grad students pretty fast, but the critical recruit was really the very first person in my lab, which was a technician who actually she was a biology major with a math minor, and bringing that combination of sense about the wet lab science, but with the quantitative skills that she brought with her mathematics background, paid dividends out like you would not believe. There was a level of attention to detail that she had. She helped organize everything, structured everything really beautifully. And then she was able to take on a lot of our science that was kind of, as I kind of call it, happening at the interface between cell biology and biophysics and so forth. So I found that to be incredibly beneficial. I've always been very fortunate in the folks that I've been able to recruit, period. But I can tell you, having key technicians, especially early, was invaluable for me. So I do believe you recruit who you can recruit, and you maximize whoever it is you get. But then also in recognizing that you are your own best postdoc at the beginning are kind of the critical ingredients of personnel recruitment at the front end of a lab.
Can I add on to that as well? Just in thinking of, like my first technician who was really well organized and really, she helped set the tone of the lab, and it was really very useful, and it was just a really great working experience. I think when you're thinking about hiring people, for me, we don't really get very much management training. And I think for me, having a smaller group was easier to manage. And it was, I forget what the exact term that a colleague used, but if you hired too many people or the wrong person, the amount of time that goes into I had never heard of a dominant negative phenotype, but then I kind of experienced something like that, and it's an incredible drain on your time, but also just there's just the amount of mental energy that goes into trying to resolve conflicts or just those types of things. And so and it's very, it's hard to know who the right person is, but I actually found there's a book that HHMI put out called Making the Right Moves. Between that and At the Helm, there was really good, there's just a number of interview questions for references, as well as thinking about who you're gonna, you would ask questions of the person you're thinking of hiring that were really useful. And it was tailored for if you're hiring a technician or thinking about somebody who's gonna rotate, so many things that we have very little training for, and there are resources out there that are are extremely useful. And that book is like available it's a PDF online.
Great, thank you so much. So we have another question that several people seem to be interested in. And so that is, so Ray says, I had a tough time managing my expectations on students' productivity. For example, I expected first-year PhD students to be almost as productive as a senior postdoc. So can the panelists talk about whether they had a similar experience or how you manage these expectations? Dr. Kwan, can you go first?
That's a great question. I agree with Dr. Shen's observation that, you know, we're thrust into these positions as managers with very little sort of formal training or structured training in terms of how to actually go about doing it. And so a lot of it, for me personally, has been just sort of through cumulative experiences. And I would say, you know, it's funny, one of the things that I have felt sort of as a sort of being thrust into this role is that, yeah, you're constantly sort of reevaluating, you know, your expectations, I'd say. And I don't think that's unique. I think I've, you know, just talking to colleagues, I remember talking to one colleague who said he was his first year as a PI, and he's like it's a constant exercise in managing your expectations. And I thought that was a great phrase. But I think that's okay. You know, I think by sort of you know, by training more and more people, seeing sort of you know, but understanding sort of, you know, the different types of environments and sort of interactions and relationships that different people respond well to me has actually been really interesting. And it's been like actually an interesting sort of intriguing part of the job that I wasn't expecting. And so yeah, I think it's going to be inevitable that you're going to go in and your expectations are going to be, you're going to have to reevaluate them. But I think that's totally just I think that's a formative learning experience that ultimately makes you more effective in the long run.
Great, Dr. Robinson, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to add one thing, or a couple things maybe. So I would say first off, in general, my experience has been that it takes about 2 years to get a new grad student's legs under them. Now, that doesn't mean they're not brilliant, because they are, and some of my most amazingly productive people have been grad students, so there's no correlation in terms of overall productivity, but I think it's important to kind of recognize what stage of career development each of your lab members is at. And, you know, and so now they're all, I value everyone's perspective and input independently of what their training level might be. Yet, because, you know, we've had great ideas that have come forward to us through our undergrads, for example. Even high school students have come in and participated and come up with a brilliant idea, right? So brilliance is everywhere. You know, there's an experience component that takes time to develop. So not everybody's going to have that right away because it takes time. There's no substitute for that. But I think recognizing that, you know, when you're selecting or identifying people and figuring out what your expectations are, realize, on average, you know, it's a distribution, nothing's ever binary or set in stone, but typically I find it takes about 2 years before a grad student's going to really get their legs solidly under them. And frankly, for that matter, I don't care what level they're at, you know, any project that somebody's going to launch takes about 2 years before you're going to start getting the big payback in data, because you're coming up with a new project, you're putting all the infrastructure in place that you need, all the reagents, cell lines, plasmids, whatever you have to get put together. And then all of a sudden you'll have that, and you're going along and it's that churn of trying to get through all of that. And then all of a sudden, boom, the data starts flowing. And so I think kind of appreciating that timeline, for at least in my world and the kind of science we do, understanding and appreciating that timeline for before things are going to be productive in terms of data generation is also really important in terms of, well, I don't expect you to have data yet. You just started this project, and it's going to take time for you to build all the resources and reagents and tools that you're going to need. But I promise you, it's coming. And I'm there with you. I'm going to help you. You will get there. It's going to be amazing. And then voila, all of a sudden, boom, they're going, oh my God, data's coming like this. I go, I told you. Just a matter of time and perseverance.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Shen, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, these are all really great insights. One of the things that I think was a big adjustment for me, I mean, there's certainly like managing, like realizing that people are different. I mean, it seems so obvious, but like figuring out what different personality types are. I mean, like, I really wish I'd minored in psychology because I feel like it could have like really benefited me, because I remember so much of my first year being like, well, I would have done it this way. And it's kind of mind boggling, like that this person did it in this way. And just understanding more about, different people will approach. And it really probably is very obvious to many people, but it wasn't so obvious to me. Like, as I've had more experience mentoring people, there's, it's easier to mentor somebody who like thinks more like you and responds to things, or is like setting up experiments in a similar way. And really part of our job, which I didn't really fully appreciate as PIs, is to like, and it's one of the most satisfying things about being a PI, is helping students develop as scientists. And it is a process, and sort of recognizing that, like, where somebody starts you actually often don't know what they're going to be able to do, but your role is to try and help them unlock their potential. And so it's understanding who that person is, and do they want sort of more hands-on, or like, direct like involvement in sort of planning experiment, or do they want the freedom and like to really try some things out and like learn, and like what type of learners are they, and it's really sort of like trying to figure out how you can help them get to where they're going to go. And I don't know if like efficient is the right word, but like one solution doesn't fit all. And I think that even though that is probably very obvious, it was harder for like, I mean, I'm constantly learning, and it's really useful for me to see more senior PIs, and for them to see how they, in the years of experience that they have accumulated, can kind of more quickly assess like, this student needs this type of project. And so I would also say, like, this is it's a giant learning exercise, and to give yourself some grace as well, as you're going to make some, like, just to continually be thinking about how you might do something different, or like thinking about it as like, I don't know if problem is the right word, but like, something that you're trying to optimize around. I think is something that if I were to go back and tell myself that, and how to have regular meetings with people, because like I never really had regular meetings with my PIs, and that also is something that seems very obvious now, but it was something that it depends on how you were, like the training environment you experienced, and that I found the regular meetings has worked really well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add something, and something that Dr. Shen said about sort of continuing to grow. And I definitely feel for myself, and I don't think I'm alone, as a PI, like there's this idea that, okay, once you're done with your postdoctoral training, you're done in your scientific training. But for me, I'm still continuing to grow and develop as a scientist, continuing to hone sort of my craft. And I'm a much better scientist than I am, when I came out of my postdoctoral training. And I think it's easy to forget, actually, at least for me personally, like actually how far I've come. And when I actually one day recently, I went back and actually read my an old fellowship application that I submitted as a PhD student, and it was awful. It was so bad. And it just, it's easy to forget actually how little you knew back then. And I think that also helps in managing your expectations too. Just, having, actually you've come a long way as a PI. And so just, it's good to think back about how hard it was when you were in your training.
Can I add one other thing, sort of separate from the points raised, but one thing that I have always thought and felt that was really crucial is when you bring in your students, your trainees, to and and they're trying to figure out what project that they want to work on, I try to find a project that matches with what they're passionate about. It's not me just telling them, go do this. This is the question you have to answer. It's, what are you interested in? What do you want to pursue? I mean, it needs to be sort of broadly under our umbrella of science. But by doing so, then they are passionate about it. And then what, so then I view, then what I view it is from there is that my job is to, I kind of think of it, liken it to a curling game where they're the ones pushing the puck. And my job is just to kind of help sweep smooth the ice to help them hit the target that they're aiming for. And, and I do that through trying to provide ongoing guidance and support and helping them navigate, but really letting them explore their own vision, their own mission, their own passion. One of the things I'll say is I rarely never tell my trainees anything. But then I say, but here's the deal. I will rarely never tell you anything. But if I suggest something 3 times, please give it special attention because there's probably a backdrop of information that I might have because of my time spent in the field that you haven't quite gotten yet. And so that actually works really well because it ends up making, everyone's on their own. They're pursuing their dream, their vision. They're more passionate about it. They're going to be harder working. They're more inspired, motivated. It's their victories when they hit pay dirt and all of a sudden they get that big phase where all the fountain of data is coming out of it. It's like, you worked on this. This was your dream. It's happening now. And I will say I had the benefit that both my grad and postdoc advisors very similarly modeled that kind of an approach for me. They never said, Doug, do this. They always said, what are you interested in? Go after it, go.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you to the audience for submitting your questions and for also voting for your questions. That's helping us lead the discussion. So Jody has a question somewhat related to lab management. So how do you deal with conflict resolution? So issues between lab members, and how do you have these hard conversations, including confronting students who may not be meeting expectations? Dr. Robinson, can you start us off?
Sure. So one of the things when I first opened my lab in 2002 was the first HHMI Burroughs Wellcome lab management course. I think they only offered it maybe a couple times and they've made some books out of that. And so I attended that. And I thought there was a really great piece of advice that I took from that and actually set it up that month, which was to create a lab vision statement. And I keep it exactly written as I did in 2002 because it was a new assistant professor version of me, so I don't want to kind of give that up, that idea. But when in there, I detailed out things like what is expected of every trainee, every member of the lab. And I included not just what was expected of my trainees, but also what's expected of me. I don't make it a contract. I've heard of scenarios where labs will make it a contract. I think that ends up creating a little bit of toxicity. And so at least in scenarios that I've heard of, not saying it's categorically the case, but I've heard of scenarios where that's the case. We don't do it that way, but we definitely have that. I make that available. And it's really nice because then anybody can go through and read that even when, and I give it to them when they're rotating in the lab. So they kind of know what they're signing on for. But in there, they also realize what level of support they're going to get and how it's going to impact them. And so that has been very, very useful for setting things. Now, in terms of dealing with hard conflict, one thing I'm a big believer of, you may see that my door is closed over here. And if I have to have a hard conversation with someone, I never do it in my office with the door closed. I actually do it out in the hallway. Not because there's going to be anybody around listening, but because there's always a chance somebody could be standing around the corner or could come walking down the hallway. And what I have found is that, fortunately, I haven't had to have too many such hard conversations, but no PI is going to go through their career without ever having to have them. And what I find by having them in a semi-public space elevates everybody's game so that everybody takes a higher level of professionalism to the conversation. And it's much easier to discuss the hard points, the hard topics, when everybody's got to be on their game. As soon as you close that door, there's risks that get imposed, and including, the he said, she said scenario. And so you want to try to, I think, alleviate those elements of risk as well. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that very often, but when it has happened, it's paid out very well.
Wonderful. Dr. Kwan? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, Dr. Robinson, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've also been, I guess, in somewhat of a fortunate situation where we haven't had a ton of conflict, in our lab. One of the things that when we make any type of hiring decisions, one of the things that we do is we involve basically the entire lab in the hiring process. So, whether it's a research scientist or a graduate student or a postdoc, we'll have them. Sorry if you can hear my dog in the background, but yeah, we'll have them basically participate in the interview process. So they'll talk to them one-on-one, and we'll make a collective decision about whether we think that this person would be, a good fit for the lab. And I think that's helped to create, a really strong chemistry and supportive culture, within the lab. The few times when we have had to talk about sort of expectations, the situations when that's arose, it was with people who've been in, it was in my situation, it was with people who've been in the lab for a bit of time. And I think one of the things that benefit from those particular situations was that there was sort of a foundation of trust that had been accumulated over those years, which allowed, I think, for a much more, I'd say, honest discussion and a better understanding of where each person was coming from. And so I think that, there is a lot of value. Sometimes we talk about differences between advising and mentoring, and with mentorship, there's this understanding that, as a mentor, you're going to, acquire a sort of a deep understanding of your mentee, and help to understand, what things they're bringing to the space, what things they're good at, what things they're bad at, and helping to then figure out a way to best take advantage of those strengths while also sort of addressing some of the weaknesses. And I think having that sort of deeper understanding of your mentees can really, really help when they're ultimately those hard decisions, hard conversations arise. So, yeah.
Dr. Shen.
So I think the really great points were made. I did things sort of retroactively in terms of the culture document or the vision statement that Dr. Robinson was mentioning, because I have fortunately not had much, like any sort of personnel issues for quite a long time. And then something was kind of festering in the background, and I kind of like had a sense, but I was like, oh, maybe it'll go away. And like, never, like my first piece of advice, like be proactive if you feel like there is some sort of, because it's often hard to know whether somebody in your lab is going to bring to your attention something, because like there's a lot of dynamics going on. And so it's hard to know if there's a problem. But if you do get a vague sense that there, or if somebody is like, speaks to you, then in retrospect, what I would have done was what I learned was a 360 review, which I'd never, apparently if you go to like management programs, this is something that you learn about, is just to talk to everybody, every single person in the lab about sort of what they, like how they're feeling, and to ask direct questions just about the issue or what they observe, and just to hear their perspective, and then to sort of really come from a place of like wanting to learn and being open to listening and to like hearing like I wanted, like sometimes it's hard for people to say something to their advisor or their boss that's like negative feedback for them, but I really like coming from a place that indicated that I really wanted to learn and to improve, and like acknowledging mistakes that were made, or and to really come at it from like a sort of problem solving perspective, and to make it clear that I wanted to support everyone, because even you have like like in this case it was an interlab conflict, it was like I talked to a lot of other PIs as well and got a lot of advice. But I think what was helpful was just sort of to get everybody's perspective. And then we had kind of a group meeting and kind of came up with a lab as what our vision was for the type of lab we wanted to have. And now I have the sort of lab manual document that I would suggest that everybody create starting out. There's like a number of great examples online. Ours is like on our Google Drive, and we have like an onboarding checklist, which is also the other thing I would suggest. It's really nice to have like, okay, you need these things for like this software, and like, but even just like, you know, stating from the beginning, like, this is what you can expect of me. This is what I, you know, generally expect of people in lab, and really being able to set the culture and kind of maintain that. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think I've also been fortunate not to have like the conversation about expectations, like somebody's just like not coming to lab, or I'm sure that as I, you know, it will eventually happen. I know many people who have encountered that. And I think one of the things is just like, so with the like sort of weekly check-ins that I have with people, it's not just talking about the science, it's just like, how are things going? How are you feeling about X? Or just like making sure to like periodically just be like, you know, how are you feeling overall? I think with the pandemic, it's been pretty challenging for many people. And one thing I realized from that end was just the importance of also doing things as a lab together, and to really just kind of building, you know, like not everybody has to be like super good friends or anything, but just creating some sort of camaraderie between people. Like these were things that my PIs had done. I didn't really realize, like sort of when I had family, it was like harder to kind of do some things like that. I really should prioritize those things.
Wonderful, thank you. So we are getting close to the end of the session. There are a couple questions that I think are that everyone is very interested in. So I'm going to try and get through them quickly. If you can all give just quick opinions on them. Okay, so the first is, so you've gotten the job, you're kind of relieved at this point, but now you're now starting with a new set of expectations. So how difficult was life during the initial years in terms of getting the first paper published in your own lab? How stressful was it? And does it get any better, or does it just, does it get better in terms of the level of anxiety with time, or does it just get worse? So I'm just going to open it up if anyone has any quick opinions, and then if not, we can move to the last question.
I would add that not only was I in that phase, I also had a 2.5-year-old and a 2-month-old. So, so we were running, you know, full court press for quite some time while being a new assistant professor launching a lab. I think that it gets easier and it gets harder in different ways. So, you know, yes, you get your first paper out finally. It does take a couple of years, at least it did for us, to get our first paper out. That's normal. You know, nosedived right into starting to, you know, write for grants and things like that, and, you know, take advantage of every new investigator type grant opportunity that's out there, because it's a little different. They're not necessarily easy to get, but it's at least a different pool of applicants and so forth, and you know, a little different expectations in terms of how much preliminary data you already have and things like that. So that can help. And, you know, just realize that, you know, there can be an expectation that things are going to get easier over time, but I would say they do, but they also get harder in part because we expect it to be different over time. So it, you know, just it's a ride.
I would say that it's incredibly stressful, but it did, like, I think sort of similar when you think about transitions you made from going to grad school to postdoc, like the beginning is always hard, and things will get faster. Like when I think about how long it took me to write my first grant, like luckily, I mean, well, it will, like the beginning things will take a lot longer, and fortunately they will, you know, as you get more experience, they'll be faster. So it does get better, but there are other things that sort of come up that you're always kind of like adjusting to.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is it absolutely does get easier. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. There's going to be waves of things when things get difficult. But you know, one thing there's two nice things. One is that, you know, when you're first starting off, I feel like, for me anyways, I had so much energy at the time because it's just like a brand new environment. You feel like you're free, right? And just you can just build off that energy. And the other thing that's nice too is that sort of there's this, I actually don't know if this is real, but I've heard of something called the IKEA effect, where people develop an irrational love of IKEA furniture. And it's because they actually build the furniture themselves. So, you know, if you were motivated and interested and love science like right now, while pursuing other people's ideas, you're going to love it so much more when you're actually pursuing your own ideas. And that's going to give you energy too. And so yeah, just ride that wave of energy.
Awesome, thank you. So we have one last question. I think this is a great one to end based on the credentials you all have. So Swati says, thank you all for your advice. When starting off, did you feel pressure to say yes to all the opportunities, such as teaching, being on thesis committees, other commitments? And I know for you all, you have additional responsibilities being on committees, on leading groups. Dr. Robinson, I know Dr. Shen, you also help with the SACNAS chapter. Dr. Kwan, you've received mentoring awards for the outreach you've done. And so they want to know, how did you balance with these responsibilities, these asks you're getting, as well as being productive in the lab as you're starting it off? I'll open the floor again.
So I would say that when you're starting out, you should really prioritize getting your research off the ground. Like you're a startup company at the beginning, and you're like being able to get the lab established has allowed me to be able to spend time doing things like a lot of mentoring or investment in pipeline programs or things that I really am passionate about, but I would not have been able to, like, I think that what has allowed me the flexibility to spend time on things that I really enjoy doing is because I have the lab kind of operational and was able to build, my lab program up.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Dr. Shen said. That's also something that I found to be very useful is, you don't, within the portfolio of things that you're doing, they don't have to be sort of spread in the same proportion of time every single quarter, or even every single year. So you can prioritize certain things in certain periods of your career development, and then other things in other periods, and still in the end, give the same amount of time to these different things. So you should take advantage of that. And the other thing too is, I'd say as a new assistant professor, there still is a power dynamic, right? Like you'll get asked by more senior faculty to get involved in certain activities or to collaborate on certain projects. And I felt like for myself, actually, as a new assistant professor, like the pressure to say yes because of that power dynamic. But I think it's really important to make sure that you're protective. Your time is so valuable, and so to be protective of it. Make sure that you're putting it towards the things that are most important towards your career development. And when you do get involved in service, make sure that the best that you can, that's aligning with the things that you are most interested in, feel valuable and feel as valuable. And so that would be my advice.
Yeah, so when there's this kind of idea out there that learn to say no, and I actually disagree with that. I actually think what Dr. Kwan, Dr. Shen sort of pointed out is kind of captures what I'm going to suggest next, which is don't learn to say no, learn to say strategically yes. So in other words, when you get asked to do things, okay, so for the promotion process, you're going to be assessed on your scholarship for sure. You're also going to be, there will be a component that considers your service to the institution, your role in education. Think about the in our case, tripartite mission here, certainly bipartite for non-medical school, perhaps type environments, whatnot. But by strategically saying yes, what I would often do is I would sit and an opportunity would come and I would think it through. Okay, what is going to benefit me? And I'm going to say yes to it, because then when you get asked to do something, but you've already said yes to certain things that you think are going to be mutually beneficial, it's very convenient. So, actually, I'm already doing this and this and this. I think I've got enough on my plate. And they go, oh yeah, you're right. You've got enough. But the other thing I can do, would say about strategically saying yes, is I can sit and point to many opportunities that came about by having said yes. So for example, meeting new colleagues at my institution that opened the door for new collaborations that ended up being really beneficial for our science that I never would have had that opportunity had I not first met them. And it made all the difference in the world, being able to have those connections and so forth. So anyway, don't say no, strategically say yes, so then you can gracefully say no. We probably do have time for one more question, maybe, if you've got one.
I think we're getting close. We have to keep the
Okay.
show going.
All right.
When do you want to end the session?
Yes. So, great. It looks like we're out of time for this discussion. Thank you to our panelists again for giving them time and sharing with us today. And thank you all for attending for our panel today. We will have a short break, but please come back at 11:15 a.m. ET for the associate flash talk and Q&A. Also, remember to check out the exhibitors page for information and opportunities from our partner institutions. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Take care. So are we all free to sign off, or did you?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Take care.